All right. Well, thanks, man. Thanks, Jed, for being here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. How's it going?
I'm good. Were you able to get a backup going also?
Yes, it may just be mine. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay.
Either way, at least,
It should, yeah, it should be fine. I don't want to jinx it, but
nah, it'll be good.
I haven't had a Riverside issue in like a while. And again, I probably shouldn't even fucking say that, but I haven't had an issue in a while. Dude, I just interviewed, I don't know if we're the same age. I think you're probably younger than me. Do you remember that song?
Yes. How old are you? Or unless you don't want to reveal, how old do you think I am? How about that?
I'm assuming you are in your mid to late 30s.
Oh, very good. Okay. So 37 on the 25th.
Okay. So I am older than you.
Okay.
I've made a decision though to stop saying my age on the podcast because I look a lot younger than I am. And I think I just need to let that ride. Like a few weeks ago, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. A few weeks ago, I interviewed someone and she assumed I was her. Something came up about age. And I did the same thing I just did with you. I said, well, I'm a little older than you. And she said, I don't think you are. And I said, I think I am. How old are you? And she said 35. And I said how old I was. And I got like 3 text messages from listeners. One of them was my friend who also has a show who texted me in all caps, you're blank, blank. And I was like, okay,
no.
I'm like, all right, I need to just stop saying it, especially in the world of like social media and all that stuff. For me as a chick, I'm like, all right, I should probably just try to pass off younger because like, okay.
Yeah, that's brutal, huh? That really is the double standard where it's like,
a thing.
Yeah, men age, like George Clooney, and everyone assumes.
Totally.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I lived in LA for a while to do acting, which was mostly cocaine and waitressing. But I think that's where I got, very cliche, but I think that's where I got the weird like age stuff. I was lying about my IMDb. When I was like 23, I got an IMDb credit. And at 23, I was like really panicked about my age and I made myself like 21 or something.
Oh no.
Yeah. So it really got in. So anyways. Regardless.
Yeah, I went to a treatment center in Huntington Beach, and so we would go to meetings in Newport, and that was where I saw 79-year-old dudes wearing like Hurley sweatshirts, and I was just like, this is a little weird,
Yeah, totally, dude. The scene in Southern California for AA, especially in Orange County, what you're talking about right there, is I don't know if it was AA or I'm assuming AA.
It was AA.
Okay, AA in Orange County, and I think LA too is like a legit scene, like the who's who of people. Everybody's dressed really nicely, like which is in a way kind of cool because like my biggest fear when I got sober was that I would be out of anything like that, and so it's cool to be a part of things, you know what I mean? But it's like very, very bougie.
Yes, extremely. Especially, and we rolled up, like in the van, the rehab van. And so it's like, I'm in my sweats or whatever. And it's just like, oh, okay. Y'all are fancy.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. Well, let's talk about how you got to the inside of an van in Orange County. You and I have something very similar, which is that I listened to your episode with your dad, one of the very first episodes that you did of your podcast, Church and Other Drugs. And my parents were super involved in my church too. My mom was the youth minister. And I was I was the president of my youth group. And I was like super duper into it also. I was a super good kid. And he was talking about your youth group. And youth group is like, I don't think I've ever talked about this on the show. Youth group is one of like the cornerstones of my life. Like,
dude.
Yeah, like the people, they were all in my wedding. Like one of them's their birthday today. He turned like 46. He was the man of honor in my wedding. I met him when we were 12 and they're still my best friends.
What denomination?
Methodist.
Okay.
What are y'all?
Presbyterian. For me, it was both. And I've been rethinking about it because I just had a daughter and it's both like the best and worst, like it's like there's like some absolute spiritual trauma because of like purity culture and shit, but then some of the like literally like
we didn't have that though, which is interesting because I want to hear about that. I think Methodists are a little bit more on the relaxed side. We didn't really have that. Like there was not a lot of, I probably wasn't supposed to have sex till I got married or whatever, but I didn't sign one of those pieces of paper or anything. Like,
oh, you didn't get the ring, or you didn't?
No, I didn't get the ring.
You didn't like promise yourself to Jesus. you know?
No, no, but I know that that's a thing. Okay, but I'm jumping like way ahead of myself. So I was very excited to hear you start talking about youth group with your dad because it was like a really big deal in my life too. So where did you grow up?
Columbia, South Carolina. Columbia,
Okay.
South Carolina. Yeah.
Okay. And talk to me about, yeah, like growing up, the dynamic in your family.
So I got one older sister. My dad, he was in the military, but he wasn't. He was in the reserves, so he did human resources, worked at the hospital, and then he was Major Payne. That's the big joke. Like he was literally a
Is it,
major.
oh, right, because that's your
Yeah,
actual name.
yeah.
Oh
So
my
that
God, that's
was
hilarious.
awesome. Every time I got a letter, I would just laugh my ass off.
That's so funny.
So my parents were. My dad would profess like the Jesus freak movement of the 70s, I guess, where it like swept through colleges and stuff. So he got super born again. My mom was always Christian. So all that to say, they never smoked a cigarette. They never had a wild time. None of that. So I grew up, with that mindset and like, oh, I will never drink. I remember like giving my aunt like the hardest time in the world because she was smoking cigarettes. I was like, Aunt Sylvia, can you please stop smoking? So like super against it. And I had an up until sixth grade, I grew up in a small town called Easley, South Carolina. And my childhood was awesome. And then in sixth grade, we moved to Columbia, which was a bigger metro area. So it was like a combination of like moving early. I was like a late bloomer puberty wise and going to a huge school all of a sudden. So for the first time I didn't fit in and I started it was Tourette's and my tics where I would roll my eyes like that and and I would blow air out of my nose. And that's
Like
very
actual
yeah.
Tourette's? You have
Yeah.
okay,
So
wow.
we didn't know at the time, but that's a
Okay.
very bullyable offense
Of
in
course it
sixth
is.
grade, and it would just
Absolutely it
make it worse.
is.
So when I was 11, yeah, they put me on Risperidol when I was 11. Yeah, so I've for the most part grown out of it. Like it'll get triggered by like anxiety or like certain drugs. Well, I'll get to that would set it off like in insane amounts. But so for the first time, life was kind of rough a little bit. And when I was going through puberty, and this is where purity culture comes in, so I always had, for whatever reason, the big idea of God that I picked up was that God hates sinners, you're a sinner. If you sin, you go to hell, but God loves you. So I had like the Catholic guilt without being a Catholic. And it was specifically focused on like sexual sin. That was like really brought up. And so as like a teenage boy, you start doing things. And I would go through the cycle of like porn, masturbation, intense guilt and regret, and like repentance, like that cycle. Until the first thing I did was like I smoked weed. I tried cigarettes. Like my parents caught me for smoking weed when I was 12. I just tried it. And so they started drug testing me. So they did like a huge reaction. And so because of that, I just found error. This is when I kind of started rebelling. And I went to arrowwood.com and found out like things like cough medicine and DXM. And so the first time I tripped Coracetin and cough and cold, it was a summer night between 9th and 10th grade. And I walked outside, threw up and put my hands in the grass, and like my hands melted into the grass. And I was like, this is the greatest thing I have ever felt in my life. And I don't talk about this all the time, but this is like, it's so weird how this perfect storm happened. Was I also figured out that this is for all to see, but this is embarrassing. Maybe someone will relate. So because I watched, the other thing was like nobody talked to me about, I never had the sex talk. Nobody sat me down.
I was going to ask that.
Okay. Yeah. So it was just kind of me and my friends figuring it out. And then we passed around back in the olden days, we had like one VHS tape that we passed around. And I remember thinking that, okay, so dudes having sex equals you got to last for like an hour and a half. And my first experience ended very quickly as a, 14.
Sure,
yeah.
Yeah.
But it was terribly embarrassing. And I had super anxiety. And then I figured out that if I took some cough medicine, that problem was solved. And as an added bonus, it covered up the guilt I felt about doing that. The day I lost my virginity, like the first thing I did was call all my friends and brag. And then after I hung up with the last person, I just like wept. And I thought I had just committed the greatest act of evil. And so, I wanted to keep doing those things. And so then I just kind of figured out that drugs would help me do those things. So that's really what started me down a heavy drug path early, despite like it not being around anywhere.
Yeah. You know what's interesting? Even though I was like, oh, we didn't have the Puritan side of things, sex was a really, really bad thing in our world too, actually. And I think it was so long ago that I kind of have forgotten. But like, it was also, but do you think it's like that for all teenagers? Because we were both in the Bible Belt. If you grow up in
No,
Chicago,
yeah, I doubt
it's
it.
not like that. I
I
should
don't
ask my
think
husband.
so.
He's from San Francisco. I don't think it was as big. Like it was, you're right. It was a really big deal. Like I remember one of my best friends, we were on a ski trip for the youth group and she taught me how to inhale a cigarette for the first time on a ski lift. And then also I remember asking her, she was a little older than me, what's the worst thing you've ever done? And
Yes.
she said, probably sex. She said, probably sex. And I was floored that she'd had sex. And there was a lot of negativity around it too. So it's not like that with other people, teenagers?
I don't know. But, well,
Yeah.
so, but at the same time, like we were all hooking up with each other at the lock-ins, like, like it was
The
a weird.
lock-ins! Oh my
Yes,
God,
dude.
core memory just unlocked, dude.
Um,
Oh my gosh. For my listeners that did not grow up in a Bible Belt youth group, a lock-in is when they lock your youth group into, for us, we did it at the local gym, Club Peachtree it was called. So we could go in the pool and run on the treadmills and play
it
on
was
the
the
whatever.
best. It
It
was the
was actually
best.
pretty fun. Where
It
were
was
your
so fun.
lock-ins? Where'd you guys have them?
We would do it at we've done it at a skating rink. We do it like
Oh
at the
yeah, that's
church,
fun.
like
Yeah.
we had a huge church, or in the
Okay.
youth building.
Yeah, yeah,
Dude, so
yeah.
much fun. So also, I'm a counselor by trade, which is not a mistake because I'm just always been insanely empathetic, and I feel things very intensely, and so I obviously other people did not feel the weight of guilt that I did, and I've like come to find out that it's a specific type of OCD called religious scrupulosity, where I would say the sinner's prayer 9 times a day. I've been baptized 4 times,
Wow.
like just
Okay.
like intense salvation anxiety. And so basically it's like an OCD type, and it's focused on are me and God okay? And making sure that I do everything that I'm supposed to.
Man, I love that you're sharing this because I've never heard of this, and I'm sure you can't be the only person that
No,
feels down. I mean, it's a disorder,
yeah,
so you certainly aren't. Wow. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. All right.
And that really created like the duality, like the double life of like me doing drugs, because I had these real beliefs and convictions, and I had this weird, so like it's so stupid sounding, but so I was looking at my friends that were like drinking beer and like just doing normal high school stuff, and the rationalization I had was, so y'all are gonna do this for life. So you're just taking it slow. But I'm gonna quit one day. Like I'm gonna stop when I'm 21 because I'm not supposed to be doing this. So let me just get it all out of the way really quick. So I did cocaine at my 15th birthday, and when I was 17 was the first time I shot up heroin, and that was
Whoa.
yeah.
So wait, who in your town had? Well, now you're not in a
So
small town anymore. It's a little bit bigger. Who had the cocaine at 15?
the other guy I think was on the first episode, Andrew, the preacher's kid.
Oh my gosh. Of
Yeah.
course.
It's
Wow.
always the preach. He did, to his credit, he did before I did it. He was like, all right, Jed, like this is not like this is kind of step 2. Like this is not like other drugs. And I was like, yeah, dude,
Yeah.
whatever. Sure.
Yeah.
It's fine.
How did you feel when you did it? Did you like it?
I remember going home and watching Phone Booth with Colin Farrell. I just remember that for some reason. It was fine. It
It
wasn't
was
like,
fine. Okay.
yeah, but then when I did it the next time, I loved it. And that was the first drug that I started having to steal for. because I really hadn't, I guess the other things I was definitely like habitual with, but this was the first time I was like stealing jewelry from my parents, stealing stuff from my family. So yeah, I loved it.
So how often did you start doing it? And is this still like 15, 16 that you start
Yeah,
doing more and
this
more
is going to be
cocaine?
like between 15 and 17. This is also when I did ecstasy for the first time, back when like ecstasy was awesome, and that was also incredible, and I just wanted to do that all the time. So I would do it whenever I could. But so I'm also still living this double life of like, I'm this church kid, I'm this youth group kid. My parents sort of know, they don't know the extent at all.
What's going on
And
with you at school? Are you doing well
oh, I've
academically or?
always, I'm very charming, so I would just get, I was like smart enough to skate by and charming enough to convince the teachers to let me skate by. But things got bad enough that I needed to go to treatment. I was an outpatient when I was 15. It was just me
Oh,
and
okay.
all my druggy friends. Oh yeah, because my first my first hospitalized overdose was when I was 15 from Benadryl. I took like 38 Benadryl and lost my shit for 3 days. Like complete. Benadryl is like the craziest hallucinatory substance.
What happens if you take 38 Benadryl?
It's so scary. So it's in the same family as like Jimson weed and Datura, which is, it's classified as a deliriant. So like it's not
Okay.
fun, but it is the only it's the only drug I've ever taken where I straight up will talk to a person in front of me that is not there. Like you were
Wow.
just completely, and I saw like horrific things, like scary demons and half mutilated animals, and it was
Oh
very
my gosh.
frightening. Very frightening.
Yeah. So were you just at home and your
Yeah, I was at
parents were
home.
like, "Oh my
So
gosh, he's out of his
no,
mind," and took you to the hospital? What happened?
they knew because I had a buddy spend the night, and I think it was a Sunday morning. It was a Sunday morning, and my dad comes into the living room. I'm on the couch in boxers, socks, and I have my book bag on, and I'm kind of just like rocking back and forth. And my dad's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm getting ready for school." And he was like, "What are you talking about?" And I was like, "Yeah, Bobby just left." And he was like, "Bobby's in your room." And he's like, "What did you do?" And he said, I just like took an empty bottle and just like shook it. And he was like, "What
Oh
the
my
fuck?"
gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, okay.
So had to go to outpatient. That was, that was the first time I got introduced to NA also.
Okay.
And my sponsor asked me to buy him weed. Like it was a joke. And so immediately I'm like, okay, so 12 steps, a joke. And so when I had to go to an inpatient treatment, I was like, well, I want to find a faith-based place. So we found a fundamentalist Christian rehab in the mountains of North Carolina called Bethel Colony of Mercy. But before that, so it was a 3-month waiting list. And I'd already arranged it that I was going to finish my senior year in night school. And so I was just basically free to fuck off until I went to rehab. I literally, like, I idolized Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Dude, we would watch Requiem for a Dream we would take cough. This is a mindset thing. We would take cough medicine and watch Requiem for a Dream like for fun. Like that was our getting our rocks off. So I had a journal of every drug that I had taken, right, with like a checklist, and heroin was the unchecked box. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to treatment. I need to do heroin before I quit all this drug stuff. That's literally what I was like. I was so naive. And I was like, but I'm just going to snort it. And this chick, Ashley, in my art class just was like, oh, yeah, I know where I can get some heroin. And so I met up with these two dudes and they went and got it, came back, and then they started breaking out needles. And I was like, I'm just going to snort it. And they're like, no, dude, you got to shoot it. And I was just like, okay, and I just like kind of turned my head and handed him my arm, and that was that. And so by the time I went to that treatment center, I was a full-blown heroin addict. And so when I got there, they were like, is he going to withdraw off anything? And my parents were like, no. And I was like, oh yeah. And I was like, oh yeah,
Oh,
mom and dad,
wow.
I'm a heroin addict. And they were like, what? So
Okay, so the first time that you did heroin, so you just loved it that night with those two guys and then started buying it and shooting it yourself. Did you figure out how to inject yourself after that?
I didn't figure it out how to do it myself until so shortly after that, they shot me up with cocaine too. And that was where it was like, oh. And how I figured out how to do it myself was I had cocaine, I had a needle, and I'm calling them. I'm like, hey, dude, I need to come over and you need to do this. And they didn't answer. And I was like, well, guess we're going to find out. And dude, I butchered my arm
Butchered.
that night.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, dude, terrible.
That's always such a process. Like, so I did the same thing. I had a boyfriend hit me kind of consciously, like I didn't want to know how. And it was like my way of thinking, I don't know, because I kind of didn't really want to use a needle. And he was really dead set on it. I was a lot older at this point, but I was like, we both thought we'll have this plan of me not really learning. So I would literally go like this, right? And of course, he ends up going to jail and getting locked up. And I just tried to learn myself that night and butchered. I mean, just
It's bad.
blood streaming. Yes. I actually wasn't good at it for like a really long time.
It took me a minute too.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, and that's where you learn like what the body is capable of. So the story I always tell. So all right. So do you know when you get a fresh stick of deodorant, how it's really sharp on the edges? If anybody remembers that. Anyway, sometimes they're sharp. I would whack it on the side of a trash can to kind of wick off the edge, right? So one night I was shooting up cocaine and ran out. And so I am carpet crawling, searching the carpet, and I find this giant powder of white stuff. And I was like, no fucking way. And I like tasted it and it was like bitter. I was like, yes. And I put it in the spoon and it immediately broke down in water. So I made a fat shot and hit it and was like, like, and then it suddenly deodorant? Realized that I just shot up deodorant. Yeah.
Oh my God. That's insane.
But I was fine. Actually, I lived.
Yeah. I have never actually told this story on the show, I don't think. I accidentally shot up fabric softener once.
Oh. God.
The logic of that is insane. So I was on my way to a rehab and I was like 34. I wasn't young
so
either.
You can't blame it on youth.
No, I was like old. So I was staying at my mom's house for like a week between a detox and a rehab. And she would drop me off at this rehab. And there were a few days where I hadn't like gotten in yet. So I was supposedly just going to the day program before I got into inpatient, but she would drop me off and I would just leave. Like I would try to bum a cigarette from one of the girls outside and I would just leave and like walk around all day and get back to her house at 3, supposedly like I had taken the bus home. So I'm walking around Oceanside and there's a donation, like a Goodwill basically. And I go in the Goodwill to steal something because why not? So I go in Goodwill and I'd been like homeless for a long time at this point too. And I go in Goodwill and I steal, there's a little short sleeve, like plaid button up shirt that I thought was cute. So I steal this shirt, get home and throw it in the laundry with my mom's wash. And when I'm going to put it in the dryer, I look it was like liquid detergent and there was a bunch of black sludgy stuff left in like the fabric softener side. So it was like blue and most of the blue was gone. And then there was some black. And I thought, I know what happened. I bet the person that donated that shirt was a heroin addict.
Oh,
and Lord. She left some heroin in the pocket. And I picked the shirt that had heroin in it. I bet that's heroin. I wasn't even strung out when this happened. I had been at detox.
Oh, the wishful thinking.
Isn't that insane? And so I scooped the black stuff out of the liquid detergent fabric softener, fucking drew it up. It drew up and shot it. And immediately I tasted like Downy.
Yeah.
And I realized what happened. And I remember being like, and I like was like, put my hand here and I was like trying to take my pulse and I was like, fucking hope I don't die. Nobody was even home. Yeah, I was burping Downy for like days. Like I would burp and I could taste Downy. Isn't that insane? I don't think anything, like I didn't even get sick. Nothing even happened.
Oh, I know. I did. And I tried when I was shooting crack, you got to break it down with vinegar. And I didn't have vinegar one time. So I tried balsamic vinegar and that's not the same thing, dude. That
what
hurt.
Like, you did that? Oh my God.
burned. It hurt. It just burned, dude. It hurt so bad.
Oh my
But yeah,
God, that's
that's why
crazy.
like your body can handle, people don't
Totally,
realize that your body can
totally.
handle some shit, dude.
Dude, I ended up learning how to, I can't even think about this right now. You know, those tiny veins in the front of your wrist?
You no way.
Yeah.
I was just having
Yes.
this. I just had this because I just got a wrist tattoo, and I just was talking to my recovery friend, and he was like, "Yeah,
So I hit those like a lot. And a friend of mine is a phlebotomist. And I recently brought that up to her. And she told me that's illegal for anybody other than a doctor. Like, as a phlebotomist, she's not allowed to hit that. You can like kill yourself. There's so
yeah."
many like
The
nerves there. You
arteries
could
and
paralyze.
nerves.
Yeah. And I would just be sitting outside of a 7-Eleven, dirt everywhere, like bam, bam, bam. Isn't
Did
that?
you
And
ever
I didn't
hit?
even know that.
Did you ever hit an artery by accident? Like, like the
Yes.
artery.
Yes. Yes. Once I was in the drive-through of an El Pollo Loco. Okay, so
Nice.
this is when this I haven't told this story either. This is when my boyfriend got locked up and I was learning to do it myself. So my meth connect hooked me up with this guy, Ryan, who was actually super nice, and he had a motel room for a few days, a Motel 6. And my meth connect was like, all right, hang out with my friend Ryan because Evan will be out soon, my ex. So just stay with him. So I did. And he had like a car and everything. And we were going to go see, I know. And we were going to go to his storage unit out in like, 20 minutes away. So on the way to the storage unit, he goes through El Pollo Loco and I go to hit myself in the drive through. And as he's going around, he's like, the fuck are you doing? And I'm like, no, that's fine. And I have like a belt in my mouth or like a shoelace,
Yeah.
and I hit right away on my arm, which was so rare, right? And it was bright pink.
Yes.
And I thought,
Uh,
oh my God, I got real good at this, I guess. Bam! And then within, I don't know, 10 seconds, my whole arm swelled up. It looked like Miss Piggy hand. I remember thinking, I look like actual Miss Piggy. Like I can picture it in my head, totally swollen, like a cartoon swollen. And I had no idea what happened. And he didn't use needles. He just smoked meth. And he looked at me and but it didn't hurt. I was just
right.
like very concerned, but I wasn't
Yes.
in pain. And he was like, oh my God, what is happening to you? And I was like, I don't know. And he said, do you feel okay? And I was like, yeah, I feel all right. And so we went to his storage unit 20 minutes away with me just like staring at my hand. And I remember sitting outside of his storage unit thing. And I was like, man, I hope I don't die. And then eventually it just went away. And then a while later, I was in rehab and someone said, like, told a story like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, that happened to me. Is that what that
If it's
is? That's an
pink,
artry?
yeah. If
Yeah.
it's pink, dude, no go, no go.
When did that happen to you? What happened?
I knew. Luckily, I just remember. Oh God, and it's the Hebes. I just remember. Well, I say I knew. I figured out quick. Like it was it's a weird
It's
pink
weird. It's like
stream.
pink. It's like a
And
highlighter.
and I went to try to push, and it was just immediate pain. I was like, that's not something. There were
Oh
so
my
many.
God.
There were so many nights of just begging God to not lose my arm or my limb. Like there were so many times where, like, you get the hive breakouts or just
Or an
especially with
abscess.
Coke. Oh, dude, yeah. I've
So I
still
only
got
shot Coke once and I missed. It was in my
and
ankle
you
and
just
I
numb out.
missed.
I
And it was
missed my
just
ankle
numb.
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had to, but so dude, I did a giant Coke shot in my ankle, the giant vein on your above your ankle, and I missed.
Yeah. Oh,
And
on the
it
bone.
gave me like club foot. I rode a moped, and so I'm driving home. I would like hear this noise and look down and realize that my foot is dragging on the road, but I couldn't feel it
Oh
because my entire leg
gosh.
was numb. It was the
Oh
worst,
my
dude.
gosh. That's
Yeah.
hilarious, but terrifying. Yeah, the Coke I missed and it was just numb. I only even knew I missed because I didn't really feel anything. And then I looked and there was a giant bump there. And I was like, oh my God, I missed that whole fucking thing. And with
Yep.
heroin, that would hurt really bad. But it was
Yeah.
Coke. So
At least, yeah, and heroin, at least it would still work. But like missing meth or something, it was just like,
yeah. Oh, is that what happened? I actually didn't know because I was kind of excited to shoot the Coke I had never had. And cocaine was my first drug that I loved. Like long before heroin, cocaine was my love. And then I didn't see it for years and years and years and years and years. And then eventually I came across it. I'd been shooting dope now for a long time. And I was like, oh, I haven't seen this in forever. I've been on like the serious shit for a long time. but I missed it and it was numb and I felt nothing. And I've actually always thought it was just
That
bunk
was
coke. But
probably a gift from God that you missed that.
yeah,
Like,
you
so the
think?
cocaine was oh dude. So cocaine was the drug that I quit 8 years before I got sober because it ruined, like, my IV coke and crack run was so life ruining that I was like, if there's any chance, if I want to do drugs, like, you've got to quit cocaine and Xanax. Those were
Fair,
the two things that I was
fair.
like, and I stuck to it too, that, like, miraculously. But it was because it took a hold of me like nothing else had. Like,
I've heard that. I've known a few other people that shot crack and coke and they just loved it. And maybe I would have loved it. Maybe that was a good thing because I did ended up getting clean shortly after that, six
yeah.
months later. And so maybe my run, would have been much longer. So you go to rehab for the first time at 17. Did they have Suboxone then? Did they use Suboxone to detox you? Okay. I didn't think
No.
so.
Oh, no.
Okay.
You're at that place. The
At that
detox
place. Yeah.
was I dug a like 30-yard trench to lay concrete piping. It was like one of those, it was a faith-based place. So it was just like, you're just going to get healed. We're going to have faith and you're going to go sweat it out in the fields,
Yeah. Oh my
and,
gosh.
they did
Yeah.
they did exorcisms and stuff. It was intense. It was a very intense. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
What does an exorcism look like when you're the person?
Well, they called it deliverance class.
Okay.
It was the weirdest way I've ever seen. So they put you in a classroom with, there's like 12 or 15 of us, something like that. And they passed around cassette tape players and headphones. And on the recording was the head guy, Pastor Pruitt, his grandfather who had died, but it was a recording of him screaming in tongues just on a loop. And so you have to listen to that. And whenever you feel something, you're supposed to raise your hand. And then the ministry team comes over, they take the headphones off, and then they start asking. So for me, as like, I thought I felt something, and they called him over and they laid hands on me. And the only thing I remember being about that was that when he put his hand on my back, it felt like white hot. Like, I hated his hand being on my back. Then they ask for its name, because that's a big thing, is the demons have to name themselves, and then they call it out, and then you go outside and smoke a cigarette. And it's like, I believe in the spiritual realm and all that sort of thing, but the way that went down was probably not the correct, might not have been the right way to do it.
What was your demon's name?
I don't remember. I wish I did. I don't
Yeah.
remember. Yeah, I don't remember.
It's probably like Beelzebub, Barzabel.
Oh, I
think
think it was
biblical name.
It was like spirit of blank. So it would have been like addiction or like pornography or so. Yeah, but I can't remember what I named. It was fucking for a 17-year-old dude. It was intense, dude.
Yeah. How long were you there?
120 days, I think. 120 days.
Okay. Did you feel like it was working? Did you believe it? Were you like, I am definitely possessed by a demon? Okay.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And the meth days, I would absolutely say I was possessed by something way later in life.
Yeah. Addiction I actually had a therapist recently in San Diego. I was doing EMDR, and she was describing addiction as, she was like, look at it as like an alien that takes over your body. And she didn't mean it in any spiritual sense. She meant like the disease model of addiction. Truly also, like, it is in every single way something that isn't you that is destroying your life. I watched that. My husband, he has a year now. Next month he'll have a year, but we just went through like this awful relapse. Yeah, he was using for like a year and a half, and it was so bad. We've been together for a long time, and it was awful. And I remember even asking my sponsor once, I was like, dude, I don't think he's just an addict. I think he might be like a sociopath, right? Like, he was arrested once.
Drug,
so it was always, sure, of course, it was always Oxy forever and ever and ever, and a little bit of cocaine when he was younger. But this last time he went nuts on Ritalin.
Oh, wow.
Ritalin. Yeah, snorting like $300 worth of Ritalin a day. It was insane. Little bit of opiates just to come down. And like, I asked her, because he got extradited once for a really serious charge, for a murder charge when he was young. And he didn't do it, obviously. But I remember calling my sponsor and I was like, I think he's a sociopath. I think maybe he killed that
I
lady.
think he. Oh man,
And
dude,
she
that's
started
just
dying laughing.
amphetamines, bro.
I know, exactly. And she started cracking up laughing, and she was like, Janine, every addict is a sociopath. Because
Yeah,
it's like this outside being that takes you over. And of course, now, and he's like the kindest, most gentle, amazing man ever.
that's
But
the
like during
tragedy
that
of it.
time, yes, but during that time,
Yeah.
I was like, this guy is like a fucking murderer. I think, it's like it
Oh,
truly is like an outside.
that's why it's for any empathetic, thinking, kind hearted, caring person. That's why it's so devastating to get sober because you have to reckon with the things that you did, even though, like, there are to this day, there are so many things that I just mentally recoil at that I just can't. It's really like I'm doing brain spotting, but I'm going through trauma therapy just because and I've been through it of just so many things that just will not go away. There's just so many just dark, horrific places that addiction takes you and things that you do. And we're most addicts I meet are just great, caring people who do unspeakably evil things. And like recovery's not for pussies is like my saying. It's like it's not and that's I think what maybe some people normal people don't understand. It's like, well, it just gets it's like you don't get like what that means. Like what it means to like that's what we're running from.
That's such a great way to put it. Cause like, of course that's true, but I don't know that I've ever even really thought about that. Cause like him, he's really kind, very good guy. And he did a lot of bad things to me in particular, who he
Oh
loves.
yeah, because
And
you're the
it's so
closest.
hard. Yeah. And his mother, who he loves. And it's so hard for him to face those things. It's so hard. And I think it extended the using a couple of times because it was like, and of course I'm pissed, right? So I'm bringing it up. The people around you are like bringing it up. But you're right. For any person to have to like look at that, which is what we have to do, totally clear headed, it's very difficult,
It's very difficult, and like amphetamines in particular give you that like complete veneer of apathy and like anger, and like it just turns off all the emotions, which is it's incredibly good for that, but not good for to have to. There's a lot of times I've had to live a life that I had created on drugs, and it's like, oh, I don't like this at all. And so it's either I have to completely change my life, or it's like a groove in a ski slope. It's like if you're slotted in that groove, either you got to completely jump off and start over, or like maybe I'll just keep getting high because I hate it sober. And I've it's the sunk cost fallacy where like I put all ugh, ugh, all of it. It's rough.
A couple of things. The sunk cost fallacy, I felt that with my, even in sobriety with my business, right? It's like
Mm,
I owned this gym, and it's like it was killing me, but you put so much into it that it's like, oh, well, I have to stay with this sinking ship now, though it's killing me. But give me an example of a time that you created a life that you realized you didn't want because you had made it on the drugs.
relationships, like where I had one in particular that still I was able to make paper amends, and I heard that the person received it, declined to reply, but they received it. So that's good. The long and short of like my treatment is I went to 21 treatment centers over the course of from the time I was 15 until I was 27 in 5 different states. So like I was just in treatment, right? And because I got sent away to my first long term in Louisiana in 2005 when I was 17, and I never went home. So I never started with like a career, job, education, money, none of that. So basically I was completely reliant on my parents or other people. And I would get in these relationships. Usually, I don't know, come to think of it, I don't know if I started like a single relationship not on drugs. Like it was either like I was like a lot of them I would like meet them tripping on mushrooms and be like, oh my God, we are meant to be like, and then I kind of sober up for a second and I'm living with this person and I have no money. And like I thought, I don't really like them. I don't like myself. I don't like anyone, but I need them and I love them if I am high. If I'm like the right high and I love everything, including them. And I think that was some of it. And then eventually it was the life I was living was like, so, like the early 20s service industry grind of just like, it sucks really, and it's like, but if you can just, the right amount of drugs, and it's fine and dandy and worth it.
Totally. So is that what you would cycle through? So you'd go to treatment somewhere in a different city and then do whatever their transition program looked like, sober living, whatever, and then start serving in a restaurant?
Cooking first, like, or just random stuff, like, yeah, service stuff, coffee shops, delivering pizza. And the problem was every time back then I was fucking wild, and every one of my uses would end in a unbelievable calamity that I would have to be saved from. The worst of which was my psychiatrist prescribed me something called Gabatril for anxiety. And she prescribed it specifically because it was supposed to be non-abusable. And I remember I took like 4 of them one night, and I went drinking and I got plastered. And so the next night I wasn't drinking. So I was like, okay, so I'll just triple the amount, and that should make up for not drinking. Gabatril is a GABA agonist. And so I was living with these 2 church girls. They went to church. It was a college ministry, this amazing group of Christians that took me in. I'm still friends with them, but Lord, that I put them through some shit. They went to church. I took all my stuff. The last thing I remember was like the world started kind of shaking, and I was like, this is different. And I laid down on the couch, and the last image I have was Man versus Wild upside down. And that's the last thing I remembered. And 4 days later, I woke up. Well, this is the whole crazy story. So they came home, and the TV was turned all the way up. The apartment was trashed. They had a white couch and a glass table in front of them. And so hit my head on the table, cracked my head open, and then I started seizuring blood all over the room. So it looked like a murder scene. And I was apparently in the corner of the room, like eyes rolled back, and I was in a catatonic seizure state. And they called the paramedics. They said like they came and I guess hit me with like a benzo of some kind. And they said that I started like screaming, like demonic screaming. I don't remember any of this. And then I was in a coma for 4 days. And they told my mom and friends that they're like, okay, he's probably going to have significant brain damage. If he wakes up, he's going to be different. Like so at the hospital I was at, it was a Catholic hospital, and they have priests that go around and pray over the people in the ICU and the coma patients. And I woke up when the man was praying over me. And so the last thing I remember was Man vs. Wild. The next thing I know is I open my eyes. I can't move. I can't talk because I got a respirator. And all I see is a stereotypical priest in like the priest outfit. And so this is the one thing I can't get confirmed from anyone. So I don't know. I also saw 2 women on either side of him. They didn't look like nurses to me. I have not been able to confirm if they were actually there, if they were there, or if they're nurses. So I just saw these 3 figures, and one of them was a priest in the center. And I guess my mind just made the connection that like, you're dead and you're in heaven. Like, this is the afterlife. So I started just crying. And the only reason I know this is because I journaled it apparently the next day, is that the priest said, you've been given another chance. Like, don't waste this second life. That was the worst of one of the worst of the catastrophes. And so, yeah, that's why I would keep having to go back to treatments.
So after that incident, did you stay sober for any length of time? Did you go back to treatment like from that hospital, or?
I went straight to treatment. That treatment, it was brand new in the middle of the woods in Mississippi. And I was the only client for 30 days at this giant treatment center in the woods because it was new. There was just nobody else. So, dude, it was just me, getting fucking bombarded like 5 groups a day. Some
Yeah.
groups I'll just come in and I'll just be like, I'm not saying shit today.
Was it
Like, okay.
awesome or did it suck? Like,
All right. At first, I like had a complete breakdown, and I was still really fucked up. I passed out when I peed because of like, yeah. The first time I went to take a drug test, I woke up on the bathroom floor, and the nurse was there, and I was
so
like, "What happened?"
the side effects
Yeah,
from that incident. What other side effects were there?
I had like crazy vertigo, weird, I guess, emotional stuff. I just felt like fried, like exhausted, like just weak, exhausted.
How long did that last? Those side effects?
Maybe like, well, like residual stuff, a couple months, but like, I felt relatively normal within a month.
The amazing recuperative powers of the body, like we were saying. That's
Oh, well,
crazy.
and I was young too.
Yes,
You
that's
bounce.
also a huge part of it. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm sure, of course.
Oh, so I had a complete freak out and breakdown. I was like, I can't do this. Like, I'm so lonely. But then dude, I wish I could recapture that, because I learned how to just be completely content watching squirrels play on a porch of this. Like, it was the greatest thing in the world, to the point when another client finally came, dude, I was so mad, and I was like, get it. Like, this is my house,
Yeah.
bro. Like,
well, that's kind of why I asked, because I think I would sort of be bummed, but it would also be like kind of nice, especially after living in chaos
nice
for so long.
Yeah,
you're there,
it's what I
safe.
needed.
There's no crazy roommates that you're fucking fighting about stupid shit with, like is always the case in rehabs. So during this period of time, did you feel like I'm an addict and I'm never going to get better? Or did you still think I'm young and it was partying that got way out of hand? Where were you at mentally with the idea that I am a drug addict?
Probably early. I thought that if y'all would just let me drink and smoke weed like a normal person, I wouldn't be doing this crazy shit. But like, my parents wouldn't support me if I was drinking or smoking weed. So that was my argument. And so I was just like, y'all, all of y'all are just making me this because I can't just do normal shit. That was my argument. Then after, 8 more treatment centers and crazy shit, then it was, okay, like, I am the hopeless variety, and like, I can't stop. I'm mad at God. Why can't I stop? And then I remember finally, oh God, I don't know, some point in my 20s, I had a prescription to Suboxone, Adderall, and Xanax, and I was selling those. I was in somehow I had gotten on my own. I was selling those, so I didn't need anyone's money. And I just told my parents, I was like, hey, I don't think addiction is real. I don't think it's a disease. I'm just going to drink and smoke weed, and I'll see you later. And that was my, and that worked for, I don't know, a very short amount of time. And then that's when I found meth for the first time. And this was the absolute darkest 2 years of my life, where I was on Suboxone intermittently. So I really wasn't doing dope, but I started shooting meth, selling meth, doing a lot of research chemical hallucinogens, and selling guns. That was the new thing, because that just goes with meth.
Totally, of course, yes.
Peas in a pod.
What could possibly go wrong? Where did you live? Where was this happening? What state?
Baton Rouge.
Okay.
Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
So religious fundamentalism, methamphetamines, guns, Baton Rouge. What could possibly go wrong? I also have a question. This is kind of unrelated. Could you speak in tongues?
No.
Okay.
No, I was never able
I
to.
had a friend in high school that actually could. It was wild.
So there was what it actually, it's not the shamalama ding dong, but it's like there have been times that I felt words have been spoken from me that I didn't do. I'll put it that way. It's not the, hey, I want a Toyota Corolla. That's
right.
But,
yeah. Okay. Also,
so
what's going on with your faith during all of these rehabs?
Up until this point, if I didn't have that foundation, I would have just given up. It was really the only reason that I kept trying, was because I had this belief that like I'm not supposed to be doing this. You can do better.
So you still believed in God this whole time?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I did, until this 2 years. And this is when I also kind of experimented with, it wasn't like an outright, I don't believe, but this is why I think it was like there's just something going on spiritually. Because I remember there was one day I realized that I hadn't prayed in a long time. And so I sat there and I tried to pray, and it felt like a static screen. There's just nothing there. And I was just like, okay. I started, hearing things. This is when I was like scrawling on walls, and I had lived above these witches who would always tell me that there was like a darkness they saw in my apartment. They were practicing Wiccans, and dude, it was just such a fucking crazy, crazy, crazy times. And then guns were getting involved.
Okay. How did you sustain yourself financially during the 2 years to pay for rent and do this and do that?
So we just stopped paying rent. That was an experiment, and it worked because the person that owned our house was a judge who was rich as fuck, and she was also an alcoholic. So she just kind of forgot. And then every so often she'd be like, hey, where's my money? And I'd be like, oh yeah, I'll get it to you next week. And we just never did. So, all of these next things, I'll admit that allegedly I did these things, but this is when crime just really kicked into gear. I would mailbox steal, take identities. That's how I paid for my phone and utilities. Then I delivered pizzas at a college town, and I got really good at adding tips and stealing credit card numbers that way, which I got caught for because my last pizza guy was the manager was in cop school. So he was like, he was a fucking hard on for the law. And, so he caught me because I got really sloppy with it. Okay. And he was like, did you do this? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, okay, are we cool? And he was like, nah, the cops are on the way. And I was like, you fucking asshole. Yeah. So just a lot of crime, man. Just a lot of, and I was selling to support the habit, selling guns, and a lot of check fraud. I also got into gambling because all the meth heads hung out at the casino. And so one night I had tried to cash a bogus check at a casino. Nothing worked. I'd look on the ground, and there's a valet ticket on the ground. And I was like, huh. So I picked up the valet ticket. I walked upstairs. I handed it to the guy, and he hands me car keys. And I was like, well, this isn't stealing. Like, you gave it to me. And so I hop in this car, and I try to start it, and I realize I'm in the wrong car. So I get out, and I just kind of like hit the beeper, and yeah. it's a fucking it's a Dodge 2500 red dually truck, if you're familiar.
No,
but
giant
fucking
big.
truck.
It just sounds big. If I had to guess,
it's a big truck, right. And it had a massive Insane Clown Posse sticker on the back of it.
Oh my gosh.
So I got in the truck and I drove away. And as soon as I drove away, it was like, what are you doing? What are you going to do with a truck, dude? So I just drove it across the street, threw the keys in it, and walked home and forgot all about it. Forgot I even did that. And so like 2 months after that, it was a Sunday morning. There was a couple people that texted me, hey, I'm on the way to buy some stuff. I had a loaded gun on my hip, as was my habit. I had security camera, like a meth head setup. My safe was open. I had all my guns out because I was cleaning them. And there was just a, knock at the door. It's 9:30. And I was like, on Sunday morning, and I was like, oh, customer number one. And I opened the door, and it's a cop. And I was like, oh. And I didn't even bother looking at the cameras because, in retrospect, I tried to shut the door. He reached his hand in and handcuffed me and pushed the door open. And in my mind, this is like a sting operation. Like, I've been busted. And he's like, you remember stealing a car? And I was like, what? Because I genuinely was like, no. He was like, from blah, blah, blah casino. And I was like, oh, like, that's what this is about? He punked the shit out of me. I'll be the first to admit it. Because he was like, that was it. We were just going to leave. I was in my kitchen. And he was like, hey, do you need to lock up your apartment? And I was like, no. And then he asked again. He's like, do you need to lock up your apartment? And I was like, no. Then he asked me a third time. He's like, do you need to lock up your apartment? And at that point, I'm like, yes? Do I need to say yes? Like, is this some weird thing? And he goes, oh, okay, cool. And that was his probable cause. So he's like, so let's go look for your keys. And so he walked into my living room, saw a sawed-off shotgun, and was like, oh, you are definitely going to jail now. And I was like, fuck. And so they called in the cavalry, and they raided my shit.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Let me just interject though. He didn't punk
Yeah.
you. Anyone would have answered that question at that point. Yeah. So that's not on you. Like,
Dude, and I was I'd been up for days. I was so fucked up, dude. Like, well, this is just how dumb I was. I'm in the bottom of the cop car just waiting, and this fucking sheriff comes down, and he's like, son, you want to tell me about that bottle, what says crystal meth? Because we're about to get you for manufacture. And so
no.
I had heard this rumor that if you put meth bong water into a jar and put a piece of rope into it, that it will grow meth on the rope. So I had a jar full of meth water,
Labels?
and I wrote on the lid crystal meth in giant Sharpie. And I was like, no, officer, I am just a dumbass, dude. I swear to God.
Oh,
so
you want to tell me about that bottle? What says crystal meth?
You want to tell me about that bottle? What
God.
says crystal meth? It's like, geez, dude, I'm just an idiot.
I can't believe it didn't grow on the rope. I guess I can't believe somebody told you meth would grow on the rope.
Or if it did, it was like, dude, there were so many crazy, like, weird meth urban legends that was passed around and shit.
Totally. So what happened with that charge? You went to jail right then?
Oh, yeah. I went to East Baton Rouge Parish Prison. I called my mom and she goes, glad I know where you are, click, you know? And she had told me later that before that, she had like gotten woke up in the middle of the night and she felt like God was telling her to let me go. And like, she prayed that night. She's like, okay, I give him to you. And like 2 weeks later, I got arrested. So she always calls that officer the angel. And I'm like, I hate that dude. But it did. It absolutely saved my life. And I had a massive spiritual experience again in jail. And that's kind of how I started believing again. And so I did like 5 months in there. And then it was the first time I'd ever gotten in trouble for anything miraculously. And so I had all these character witnesses just basically saying like, hey, he's just a drug addict. Like, so I got a 10-year deferred sentence and I got 5 years of probation.
Okay.
And
what were the charges?
Oh, dude, a litany of, just possession,
Firearms,
obliterated serial number, Schedule 2, Schedule 1, intent to distribute, theft of motor vehicle.
Holy shit.
I had like 4 people's driver's licenses when I got, all just a mess, a big old mess. But I think, basically I think also like my lawyer tore apart the fact that like they just busted in my apartment. So totally. I think that helped,
Totally. So what was the spiritual experience that you had in jail?
It sounds silly, but at the time it was unbelievably poignant. So I got a trustee job. So I was working in the kitchen. East Baton Rouge Parish Prison, if anybody out there knows, is the Badlands. Like it is rough. And so I got a job in the kitchen, but you start in the dish pit where you wash 6,000 dishes 3 times a day. And then you work your way up to the best job, which is the serving line where you just fucking stand there and you scoop food. The only way you move up is when people bond out. And there's like 7 different jobs on the way up there. So I'm sitting there. I think it was like my second day scrubbing dishes. And I was like, God, for the first time in a while, I prayed. I was like, God, thank you for like getting me this far, but like if I'm gonna make it through this, I'm gonna need your help. And almost in that instant, a dude on the serving line, Brumfield, I hope he's still alive, he took a bite of a pear and just threw it back in the pan, and the CO goes, Brumfield, get off the line, Payne, move up. And he just put me to the best job right then and there. And I got overwhelmed with the feeling of like, yep, that was me. I just did that. I hear you. I'm looking out for you. And I had to like I ran to the bathroom because I just like broke down. It was like the most insane spiritual experience. It was like the only time that prayer has ever been answered like that in such a literal and direct way.
Right. In such a direct way. You know what though?
It's crazy.
I get why you would say like it might sound kind of silly, but I think what matters more than the details is that feeling you just described. Do we feel that sense of change? You know what I mean? Like, are we getting the vibe? that this
Yeah.
was a divinely ordained moment, and the details don't even matter, right? It's the signal.
No, that's what sucks about, and that's really like kind of what I've figured that like life is like how quickly we just forget. Like if you look at, if you strictly just look at the Bible, for example, as like a metaphor for humanity, it is just the story of a group of people that constantly ask for God's help. God gives them help. And the next day they're like, I'm going to go worship a cow. And then they mess up again. And if you look at it as exactly how we are, it's just and because in that moment and the next, maybe month or two, if you offer me $1 billion to deny that experience was real, I wouldn't take it. But the farther away I get from it, it's like, did that really happen? Blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's crazy how quickly we forget.
So do you think then maybe the whole journey, maybe the whole goal is, do we get to a place where we can have a consistent memory of that, keep that relation, you know what I mean? Live with that faith day to day and be less concerned day to day. I mean, to me, that's kind of like the goal.
That's the trick. Yeah, that's the goal. It is for sure.
So that's your last use for like a while though?
Yes. And so this was for almost a year. And this was the only time that the desire to use was supernaturally lifted from me. And I straight up, I had no urge, desire whatsoever to use anymore. And I went into sober living. The problem with that was I treated that gift extremely rashly and just became super arrogant and egotistic. And I didn't do anything because I didn't need to. I didn't need a sponsor. I didn't need blah, 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 blah. So that might be a good pausing point.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But I want to actually schedule a part 2 because I'm not letting,
let this go. Yeah.
So, okay.
Absolutely.
So this is going to be our part 1. Jed, you have a crazy story. Like, I didn't know all this. Okay. I listened to some of yours on your first few episodes of your show. And then I heard your episode a few weeks ago, the recent one on Dopey. And y'all didn't talk about the earlier. It was just recent.
Oh, no.
And you're like this super like, mellow looking dude. And I just was not, but this is like amazing. This is like one of the best stories.
I know.
Thank you so much for sharing these stories. This is like one of the most fun conversations I've ever had on the show.
Oh, you're easy to talk to. That's why I love. Hey, anybody that shot up detergent is okay in my book. So we can chat. You know what I mean?
Totally.